Today we are diving into the fascinating and, yeah, often misunderstood world of mourning jewelry. It was once the absolute height of fashion, but let's be honest, today the whole idea can be a little shocking. So let me just ask you straight up. Would you wear a piece of jewelry that was made from the hair of someone you loved? Yeah, if your first reaction is to kind of cringe a little, you are definitely not alone.
But here's the wild part. For people in the Victorian era, this wasn't strange at all. In fact, it was pretty much the ultimate symbol of love and remembrance. So what we see as kind of macabre, they saw as deeply, profoundly beautiful. So let's just tackle that modern reaction head on. Is it just some creepy old tradition, or is there something way deeper going on here that maybe we're missing? It's so easy for us to look back and label this as creepy or strange, but for the Victorians, it was all about respect, love, and holding onto a memory in a very real, tangible way. To get it, we really have to step into their world for a minute. You know, one of the biggest reasons for all this was actually super practical. Photography was basically brand new. It was rare, it was incredibly expensive. So people just wanted a physical, permanent piece of their loved ones, a memento that wasn't going to fade away. And this gets us to a really crucial point about the Victorian era. It was a time when death wasn't just some abstract concept. It was a constant, unavoidable part of everyday life. Just think about this for a second. The average life expectancy back then was only about 40 to 45 years old. That's a reality that is just so hard for us to even wrap our heads around. And for children, it was even more brutal. On average, 1 out of every 3 kids died before they even reached the age of 5. That level of loss, it was just a normal part of life. You had diseases that we've mostly wiped out today that were just rampant killers. Cholera, typhoid, smallpox, scarlet fever, they were everywhere. So death wasn't some distant event. It was an intimate and very frequent visitor, which made these physical symbols of remembrance so incredibly important. But this jewelry, it wasn't just some random pretty design. Oh no, it was this whole sophisticated, almost secret language of grief, where every single little detail had a very specific meaning. Early on, the whole theme was memento mori. That's a Latin phrase that means remember that you must die. It sounds a little grim, I know, but it explains why you see these really direct symbols, things like tiny skulls or little coffins on rings. It was a stark reminder of mortality. And the code was so intricate. You'd see dark materials like jet or onyx, and you'd know that person was in deep mourning. A weeping willow tree was a classic symbol of sorrow. White enamel was a really important one. It meant the person who died was unmarried or was a child. Pearls represented tears. You could tell the whole story of someone's loss without them ever saying a word. But, of course, the most personal element of all was the hair. It was sent away to these specialized artists who would painstakingly clean it and then weave it into these incredibly complex, beautiful patterns. It was the one part of your loved one that would literally never decay, a physical piece of them you could keep close to you forever. So how did this really personal practice turn into a massive mainstream fashion trend? Well, it had a lot to do with one very famous and very, very heartbroken woman. When Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, died in 1861, she was just plunged into this profound grief. And for the next 40 years, for decades, she almost exclusively wore black clothes and mourning jewelry. And since she was a huge public figure, a massive trendsetter, her devotion made this practice not just acceptable, but actually super fashionable. So the practice had been growing since the 1700s, but Victoria's influence in 1861 was like pouring gasoline on the fire. Suddenly, mass production made it affordable for the middle class, not just the super rich. But then, by the early 1900s, the tradition had almost completely faded away, except for a little revival in the 1930s with these American plastic rings that held tiny photos. And just to give you an idea of the scale we are talking about here, at its absolute peak, England was importing 50 tons of hair every single year just to meet the demand. It was a massive industry, and it even led to these widespread fears that jewelers were swapping in fake hair instead of using the real thing. So if this was such a powerful and widespread custom, what happened? Why did this really beautiful tradition just fade away? Well, ultimately, the world just changed. The customs around mourning got a lot less rigid. And this is the big one. photography became cheap and accessible. All of a sudden, everyone could have a clear, lasting image of their loved one, and that need for a physical lock of hair just wasn't as strong anymore. So while it might seem a bit weird to us now, for the Victorians, this was a beautiful and deeply human way to respond to loss. You could almost think of it as their technology for holding on to something tangible, something almost living, to make sure a precious memory could never ever disappear. And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? In our world of infinite digital photos and social media pages that become memorials, what are our modern versions of the mourning ring? How do we hold on and keep our loved ones close?